You're listening to The Invisible Addiction, a podcast investigating problem gambling.
The isolation was really what I craved, as well as the instantaneous outcomes. So I would just sit there, I would look at my machine, I wouldn't talk to anybody, and I would just be pressing a button. I had nothing. Either it was going to be death or recovery.
Okay, so joining us on the other end of the line today is Jeff Wasserman, who is a lawyer, was a lawyer. He's now a peer recovery specialist for Delaware Council on gambling problems. He's co-host on All In, the Addicted Gamblers podcast, with over 150 episodes. May I hasten to add, and he's the founder of the problem gambling support groups via Zoom. With a WhatsApp group with well over 100 members, I think. Jeff, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you. How are you doing?
Hey, Alex, how are you? Nice to see you.
Oh, nice to see you too. No, thanks for joining us today. Well, there's lots of us, lots for us to get through today. I really wanted to kind of like approach things and just, hear about your gambling addiction story. And I mean, it's just a privilege to have you on and just to have an hour of your time and to hear you talk. So, I mean, I don't know, where should we start? I mean, it's election day today in the US.
It is. It's a very monumental day, but that's okay. We still have to go on with our lives, and this podcast I've been looking forward to do with you because I'm a fan, and let's start. You said you want to hear my story, and I'll be glad to talk to share that with you.
No, that's great. That's great. I mean, for the listeners' benefit, Jeff and I, we reached out, or Jeff, you reached out on Twitter, didn't you, a few months ago, and I kind of came on board, and we kind of got to know one another, and through the Zoom groups, and this is like the away leg, isn't it? I certainly had done, we've done a podcast together on yours, haven't we?
That's right. And you're being humble because I did reach out to you, but to tell you how much I enjoyed your podcast. I thought it was wonderful. Loved the vlog. I think I told you that how genuine and how real it is. And
thank you.
It's great to have you in this community that you and I belong to, which has been, expanding and really we're able to develop such great relationships, and really appreciative of that.
No, thank you. Very, very kind. Very kind. I mean, I feel like I'm speaking to the Grand Master today.
Not at all. Not at all.
It's as I say, it's going to be great to tap into your experience. So, I mean, would you like to maybe just spend a minute or two just introducing yourself, telling the listeners a bit more about yourself and your background and experience?
Sure, absolutely. So, as anybody listening can probably tell, I'm in the U.S. and I am currently 65 years old. And
are you?
Yeah, I am. I just turned 65 with all the benefits that we get for being 65, which I like to look at the positive side of things.
You must have a great plastic surgeon.
Yeah, right. I think if I had one, I'd probably sue him for malpractice. But so I'll tell you about my first exposure, I guess, to gambling. I'm not going to go through it year by year, or we'll be here until probably New Year's. But it started. I went to the racetrack as a kid. I actually was raised in a town in New York called Elmont, and it's famous because Elmont is the home of Belmont Park, which hosts the third leg of the Triple Crown. Any horse racing fans, especially in the U.S., would know about the Belmont Stakes. So that was right in our town. And in high school, friends and I used to, go and watch a couple of races after classes ended, maybe put a couple of very minimal bets in. And that was my first foray into gambling. But, as my my life moved forward and went to college, gambling wasn't really in the picture too much. Back in those days, there wasn't that much of an opportunity to gamble. So I'm always in awe about, you know, people that live in the UK and Australia and how they're able to address their gambling issues because it's all over. I mean, you can't walk anywhere without being hit with something about gambling.
Mm.
And unfortunately, now in the US, it's starting to get that way. But certainly when I was growing up, it wasn't. Um, so I went to law school in Delaware, which is where I live now. And it's about an hour and a half drive to Atlantic City. And at the time, Atlantic City casinos were just developing. So it was pretty common for some friends of mine from law school and I to visit Atlantic City for the night and gamble at the casino. And that was really the first time I had been introduced to casino gambling.
Mm.
And I like to say that, with the stress of first year law school and my introduction to blackjack, the two sort of converged. And I found that just playing blackjack or gambling in Atlantic City was my stress release. Other friends of mine were using drugs and drinking, and I was gambling. Not to say that I was not doing any of that other stuff, but gambling is what did it for me. It made me relax, and it also was just I was in love with it. I just loved the excitement, the action. I loved being in the casino. I loved playing with friends, blackjack, and being there. But I was that guy that always wanted to stay later than my friends did, and always lost more than my friends did. So looking back, I can see that I should have had those warning signs at that time. But while I was going through it, it didn't really occur to me as anything that I had to address. It didn't affect my schoolwork. It didn't affect relationships. If I lost some more money than I needed to, or that I wanted to, I should say, for the next few weeks, then I would be eating mac and cheese or something. And then that's how it was handled. But then as I graduated law school, became an attorney, and got married, had a couple of kids. And then, life stresses go on. As much as the joys in life happen, they're usually coupled with stress. And again, my go-to for the stress was to gamble. And early on, I was very transparent about it. Told my wife when I was meeting friends at the casino, and she knew that I was hardworking, and she felt I was a good husband, a good father. So if that was my thing to relax, all good. And it was all good until it turned bad, because I needed to go with more frequency. And then I needed to bet with more money. And then I was started to go alone. And then casinos started to crop up that were closer to me. So right now, where I live is probably 20 minutes south of one casino and 20 minutes north of another casino. So I was surrounded by it. I always say that when there's opportunity to gamble, there's much greater risk of developing a gambling problem. And for me, that's what happened.
Sure. So how was it a gradual kind of was it a gradual thing, or was it kind of an overnight thing?
Yeah, that's really interesting with my I guess my experience. It was very gradual. They talk about gambling addiction or problem gambling being progressive in nature, and for me it was, but the progression really developed very, very slowly. And in some ways, that made it even more difficult for me to recognize it, because I can't look back and say that there was one pivotal moment of my gambling where I completely lost control and I did this and that. It just happened over time. And as I said, as I started to want to gamble more frequently, And as the losses sort of added up, that's when the transparency ended. That's when the lying started and the hiding of the gambling began. And that, I consider that as really the start of this downward spiral that occurred for over many years.
Sure. I mean, was it this at this point? I mean, I can relate so much to the hidden side of things, and then so I guess you were going with friends and you were being transparent. Pardon me, and then you start to go on your own. Was it just blackjack at this point, or were you kind of on other games as well?
Yeah, that's a really important question that you asked, because it was blackjack for many years, and then I found myself getting bored of blackjack. And when I say that, it shouldn't be interpreted as getting bored with gambling, because I still had that craving to gamble.
Yeah.
But I sort of changed, and now in recovery and learning about gambling addiction, I'm able to look back and say that I sort of transitioned from being an action gambler to what they call an escape gambler. So while I was playing blackjack, as I said, I was craving that action, the winning, the dopamine rush that we get every time a card is turned over. But once I got to the point where my gambling had really started to cause significant harm, both financially and emotionally, I found that blackjack wasn't doing it for me because it was too slow. That was the major thing that turned me off. I didn't want to wait until the other players decided what cards to select. I didn't want to wait for the dealer to shuffle the deck. And in fact, I didn't want to sit at a table with other people and sort of have a chat.
Yeah.
As much as I used to love that, and I loved the socialization part of it, I found myself absolutely wanting to avoid that. And I was sort of drawn to slot machines, which blew my mind at the time, Alex, because I always viewed slot machines as, that's not real gambling. And now at the time, I can say this, and I can't really say this today, given my age, but at the time I would say that slot machines were that's what the old people would play. They would, back in the day, they would take their buses to Atlantic City, go to the casino. Again, in those days, coins would actually come out of the machine when you won.
Yeah.
That's all gone. But and then the old people would love to get the buffet lunches for free, or so that was my view of slot machines. But when I started to be drawn to those slot machines, first of all, they were pretty high stakes slot machines, because I always played in that special room with the high amount slot machines. And I felt that was, that sort of set me apart in my own egotistical mind, is, well, now I can do that. And the isolation was really what I craved, as well as the instantaneous outcomes. So I would just sit there, I would look at my machine, I wouldn't talk to anybody, and I would just be pressing a button, every couple of seconds. And it would literally put me in a zone. It would numb me. And as I said, I wasn't seeking the action. In fact, there came a point in time, it didn't even matter how much I won, except that it gave me more money to continue to play. And I say this because at that point, I was in such debt that even a huge jackpot would not have made a dent. So I just played, actually, to rid myself of the pain. As silly as that sounds, and sort of counterintuitive, because most of the pain that I was experiencing was from gambling, because gambling at that point had completely wrecked my life financially, emotionally. I was leading a double life, but yet I had to continue to gamble because while I was playing the slot machine, that was the only time all of the other stresses that I was experiencing from the moment I woke up to the moment I was able to fall asleep, they were gone because I could focus on that machine and numb myself. And that was really, I would say, the most significant part of my gambling addiction, or the highest level of severity, is seeking that emotional help from gambling.
Wow. I mean, lots of thoughts for me there, Jeff. I mean, I can relate to the blackjack, certainly. For me, it was almost the opposite. I started on the roulette and I wanted to kind of get onto blackjack because it was, for me, it was seen as this almost a cut above. You know, the roulette was like, well, this is ridiculous. But I can relate to everything you've just said there, because it was like, I didn't want to stop gambling. I wasn't bored of roulette. I wanted to just move on and get better. And the blackjack, the isolation makes complete sense as well. Again, the blackjack table is actually quite sociable. I think more sociable than, say, the roulette, in my opinion. But then it got to a point where I could go to the casino and just sit there and not talk for hours, apart from just a nod of a head or a tap of a finger, or wave of my hand to say no cards or whatever. But then again, another thought that you've given me. I don't know if have you come across Louis Theroux? I don't know if he's a British journalist.
I don't think so, no.
Oh, okay. So Louis Theroux, he did this, he's a documentary maker, and he did this documentary in Las Vegas. It's probably about 15, 20 years old now. But yeah, and it relates to the point you made about slot machines perhaps being for the elderly people. And he follows, part of the documentary, he follows this elderly woman who's been, I think, divorced, or no, sorry, her husband died, and she's been left like hundreds of thousands of dollars or whatever, and yet she's, every single day she's in there playing the slot machines. And it's quite, there's two sides of it. It's quite positive because it's like almost like the social event for her, but it's also very sad because she spent thousands upon thousands of pounds. And yeah, so those are some thoughts that have come into my head.
That does not surprise me at all, because I agree. A lot of senior citizens, they go there, and it's interesting. And I talk about the isolation, but yet, while you may be isolated in the sense that you're not engaging with others, there's a certain sense of security in having all the people around. So it's not like you're isolated in a room by yourself. You're isolated, yet there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of, commotion all around while you're playing. So it's an interesting sort of, convergence of busyness with being isolated. At the time, Alex, I only now can speak of it and understand why I was feeling that way, why I had those needs. But at the time, I literally thought I was going insane. I did not attribute my behaviors and my needs at the time to something that is the result of compulsive gambling. Because I didn't know anything about compulsive gambling. I knew that I was gambling recklessly, but I didn't realize that compulsive gambling, number one, was an addiction, because I never thought about it. And number two is, I didn't think that there are so many issues emotionally that are involved with a gambling addiction, like seeking that escape, or the action, or the dopamine rush. I mean, I didn't know this until I learned about it after beginning my my recovery. At the time, there was really a time that I thought, I wonder if I have some sort of a brain tumor that was making my my thought process wacky, because I knew what I wanted, but I couldn't rationalize why I wanted it. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes. I'm nodding here because I'm just like, wow, that's exactly. You've described exactly how I felt. You just couldn't place it, and you couldn't attribute any of the downfalls or any of the the recklessness that was going on in my life and the harm I was causing to not only myself but others. But yet you just couldn't place the fact that it was actually because of the gambling. It's nuts. So were you able to kind of still operate at work? Were you still doing all right in your job?
Yeah. In fact, I remember very vividly, sort of the day after the proverbial shit hit the fan and everything blew up, and I was caught. And one of my closest friends came to visit me, and I was in bed, and he had been shocked like everybody else about who I really was and what I was doing. And his observation was, he says, I can't believe, Jeff, that you were able to compartmentalize as you did, because I was able to do my work. Clearly, it was not at full capacity, but I was able to do enough where I continued to hide my other life. And it was really strange the way I was able to sort of focus on that. Now, I will tell you, in full disclosure, for the last couple of years, I had some help, and I say this because my wife had noticed that I was really having difficulty sleeping. Obviously, she didn't know why. I knew why. So she made an appointment for me to see a psychiatrist, at which I went on. But of course, I never told the psychiatrist about the gambling.
Mm-hmm.
I was still hiding. When you hide it, you're hiding it for everybody. So this psychiatrist happened to have been someone that was, I would say, fairly liberal in prescribing medication. So I just told him, look, I'm really having a difficulty sleeping. And then in the morning, I have to go to work, and I'm a lawyer, and I have to really be sharp. And the lack of sleep was just really playing an awful role in my ability to concentrate. So his remedy was giving me Valium, so I would sleep at night, and then Adderall to take in the morning so I could be sharp during the day. And I look back at that, and I remember thinking at the time, oh man, that talk about hitting the jackpot for a compulsive gambler. Mm-hmm. That allowed me to continue to exist on 3 hours of sleep, gamble till all hours of the night, and then wake up in the morning, take my Adderall, and I was able to function at work. And, I look back on it, and I'm sure it was taking a physical toll on me as well as, emotionally, but that did allow me to continue the charade. Now, I don't fault the psychiatrist because I never disclosed the gambling. But that was the first thing that I was taken off when I started my recovery.
Wow. So Jeff, so how did so you spoke about your friend that found out and stuff. How did that come out in the wash? Was it did you tell everybody, or did they find out sort of inadvertently?
Yeah. So I'm always, again, I always admire the people that I've met in recovery that have had this epiphany, and they've finally admitted that gambling had defeated them, and they voluntarily choose to either go to GA or tell their significant other or somehow start the process of recovery. For me, that was not going to happen. I mean, I knew, Alex, that I would never admit the problem, or at least I would never seek help on my own. I had gotten myself into a situation, first of all, where I started to have a lot of difficulty in continuing to gamble just because of the money, because of the enormous debt. Obviously the loans had all been exhausted. The credit cards had been maxed out. There were no other legal resources for me to get money.
Mm.
And so I went to the illegal resources, and I started to gamble with money that was in my law firm's accounts. And in my own mind, I'm not a criminal. I would never embezzle money or take someone else's money. I was just going to borrow it. And once either, not so much gambling wise of hitting a jackpot to pay it back, although at the beginning that was doable. Then it got to the point where the amount of money that I, quote, borrowed was such that, well, for me, it was, once I settle the next big case, I would simply replenish the account. And without going into it too much, too technical, it wasn't a situation where anyone knew what I was doing. Nobody didn't get funds that they were entitled to. I was the managing partner of my small firm, so I was the only one that really had access to a number of accounts. So that wasn't an issue. I wasn't really concerned about anybody complaining, and that would lead to me getting caught. But there was one thing that I knew was going to happen, and that was that one day my law firm's accounts would be audited randomly, because that's what they do here. Maybe it's hard to predict because obviously they're random, but certainly every 3, 4, 5 years. So I had a plan in my own mind that when the day came and I got the dreaded email that our accounts would be audited, and of course that would be the moment that I knew that I could no longer hide all of the horrible things that I was doing. I had a plan that I was going to either flee the country or end my life, and that was my sort of end game. And it's interesting, when I decided on that plan, it almost gave me some closure, some peace, if you will. As horrible as that sounds, and I only felt that way because at the time, obviously, I was sick, and no normal person would have that kind of a thought. But I just felt at the time it would be so overwhelming when I got caught to endure the shame and the pain, especially to my wife, especially to my 2 adult children. I don't know if I ever told you this before, but my son is an attorney, and he was also working for me at my firm, was clearly unaware of anything that I was doing that was, related to some of the things that I talked about. And I just felt, how could I ever get through the shame of him finding out? I mean, he chose a profession that his father had. Typically that happens when there's, when your father's a role model, at least of sorts. And I was his father, his boss, his mentor. And now he would discover what I had done. I mean, it just seemed so unbearable to me. So back in July of 2015, and that's when that email came that they were going to audit my accounts, and I very politely declined the audit and left my office, and I just sat in my car at a parking lot of a local convenience store, and it said, "Okay, Jeff, well, this is what you've been planning for."
Mm.
I literally said, now is the time to, implement the plan. And so many thoughts obviously were going through my head, and I was thinking of my wife and my children, and I sort of rationalized that my wife would get over it. I mean, of course, she would grieve, as would my children. But again, in that sick mindset, I thought, well, but when they found out what I had done and who I really was, I think that they would probably get over the grief pretty quickly and it would turn to anger. But then I just, for some reason, I thought of my mother, who at the time was 88 years old. And my thought was, and I had never even given this a thought before that day, that she wouldn't be able to survive. And so if I was going to end my own life, I would be ending hers as well.
Mm.
And I said, I really don't know how I did it, because I was so bent on my plan, on following through. I said, I just can't do that to her. And that's when I went home and told my wife. And that
Wow.
started that, what I would call the weekend of horror, where the same weekend I had told my wife, and I told my law partner, and then my children. And what was just amazing to me is the compassion that they had for me.
Mm.
Now, I want to say, especially with my wife, I can't say that it was all compassion, because I destroyed her financially. And more importantly than that, I destroyed what she thought was a relationship with her husband that was based on the truth and trust and all the things that I tried to portray. And then finding out that the man that she was married to for over 30 years, she didn't know. You can imagine how traumatic that was. And it was. And, my first year of recovery, there was still so much anger and so much, in a sense, so much guilt, because the victims that the gambler creates, many of them feel guilty. Like, why didn't I see it? Why didn't I figure it out? And that's the worst thing for me to hear, because, I was feeling my own shame. I wanted to own the shame, because it wasn't anybody else's fault except my own. But it was a very tumultuous year of recovery, and really not knowing whether or not the marriage was going to last. But she stayed with me, and it was that process that I had to demonstrate to her, to my children, to all my loved ones, that I was going to address my recovery very seriously, and I had to be committed to recovery, which I was. And and I often say that it wasn't as difficult for me as it was, I would suggest, to even people like you or others, in the sense. And I'm not, I'm not trying to judge your own recovery and what you were going through, but just in terms of your age, um, for me, I had nothing. Either it was going to be death or recovery. I had lost, when everything came out, I had lost my job. I had lost my profession. I was put on what's called disability inactive status, meaning that I had a condition, in my case, obviously, mental condition, that in which I could no longer practice law competently. Um, I was very fortunate to have that result, because the only reason why is because I was able to access retirement funds in order to reimburse the accounts that I gambled with.
Yeah.
So again, and there was no quote victim in the sense that there was nobody that was harmed and that complained and so on. But it was almost easy for me because at that point I had nothing. I didn't resist recovery. When I was told that I would no longer have access to money or credit cards or debit cards, I never thought anything other than, boy, that is a burden off my shoulders, because I had such stress, especially those last years of, you know, looking at the accounts and transferring from one to the other and making sure that this
Yeah.
one, it was, I mean, incredible. I spent probably a couple of hours a night just, trying to do these acrobatics so I wouldn't get
Yeah.
caught.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it was done. So I just felt nothing but relief.
Mm.
And of course I felt security that I didn't want to have any, any ability to gamble, even if I wanted to. And for me, certainly for at least 6 to 9 months of my recovery, I didn't have, not only did I not have urges, but the thought of gambling made me sick. I mean, I spent my first week in recovery in a psychiatric hospital because of, my suicidal thoughts that I expressed. And, it's crazy. I mean, one day I was driving to work in my Mercedes that was leased by my firm, which if you saw me, you would say, oh, there's somebody that is a successful guy that probably has enough money to be very comfortable.
Yeah.
And in a matter of, a day, I was without a job, without a profession, without a car. I had nothing, but I did have my loved ones who stood by me, which was amazing. So I am so fortunate that that's how it, how it played out.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. That was well. What a share! It feels almost like a Zoom meeting there in itself. But
sometimes my life is like a Zoom meeting.
It is right now with another lockdown upon us.
Right.
But oh my goodness, so many thoughts. I mean, yeah, I'm a bit lost for words, Jeff. So what was that first? Well, sorry, I'm a bit lost for words. Let me just compose myself. I can relate a lot to the money situation in terms of, bizarrely, when I was at the casino, I wouldn't be happy until I almost didn't have any money, and the relief and everything like that. So yeah, I can relate a lot to everything you've mentioned there. So how did you get help? Obviously, you were saying you're in a sort of psychiatric unit.
Sure.
So talk us through maybe those next steps.
Absolutely. So while I was in the hospital, my wife and mostly my son. Now my son, at the time, I guess was, I want to say about 28 years old. And as I said, he continued to work for, at my firm. Very fortunate. My former partner still had him continue to work, and he really stepped up and assumed the role of of treatment director, I would say. And both he and my wife just made a lot of calls, went on the internet, wanted to see what opportunities there were for somebody in my situation. So, and they did that while I was, away. And they called, actually, where I work now, which is the Delaware Council on Gambling Problems, to get help. And they were put in touch with GA, and they were put in touch with a gambling counselor, and then made arrangements with a psychiatrist for me to see. So that was sort of all in place So when I was discharged, I often say this, I was discharged, I'll never forget, on August 3rd of 2015, which is the date, which, I mean, it's crazy to think about it now. It was the date that I was discharged. It was the date of my first Gamblers Anonymous meeting, and it was also my wife's birthday.
Wow.
And, still having those insane thoughts, when I was discharged on that day, I thought, oh, my wife will be really happy that I'm home for her birthday. But that clearly was not the case. She wanted no parts of me, and said it was probably the worst birthday gift she got, because she was still obviously so hurt and so in so much pain. So I often say that instead of taking my wife out to dinner for her birthday, I was taken to my first GA meeting. So I continued to go to GA and work with a gambling counselor, and I was put on medication from a psychiatrist that I saw, and the days at home were spent, with my dog. My wife was working because she had to, and it was good for her as well, and doing a lot of looking on the internet about, quite frankly, how I got so fucked up. I mean, I did not understand it. And then I started to learn about it. And I started to learn about gambling disorder. And that was my epiphany. That, and going to my first GA meeting and reading, what we call the combo book.
Okay.
And just reading passages that I thought should have been written for me only, because I didn't think anyone else experienced those things. And then, of course, when I heard people share in my GA room, it was incredible. I often say it was like finding that there were other people in the planet that I came from.
Yeah.
So that started really, I have to say, Alex, that gave me hope. That, of course, and what my family was doing, that they were willing to give me that chance and not abandon me. So I continued on that path, on that recovery path of GA, therapy, psychiatrist, and certain roadblocks. Like I said, giving up access to money, which I think is huge for anyone that is able to have somebody in a trusting relationship to be that accountability person and to take charge, because we want it. I always say now that we want it to put enough distance between our gambling thoughts or urges and the ability to act on them. And we put that distance by making it more difficult for us to gamble, like giving up access to money, like self-exclusion, things of that nature. I always consider roadblocks. I mean, that they're not treatment. They're not, in my view, they're not methods of recovery. They're, physical roadblocks to put in our way. And they're helpful, because when we do have an urge, it makes it more difficult for us to carry it out. And then hopefully, as we go further in recovery, then we learn about recovery, which sort of goes hand in hand with the roadblocks. So not only does it become difficult for us to gamble, but we start to really not want to gamble and look at this, better way of life that's always talked about in recovery. So, but that takes a while to sort of get to that point. I know that I have to leave my location function on my iPhone on all the time. So my 2 children and my wife can track me 24/7, which is great. Now, while I was gambling, it would always be off. And even when my wife said, "You can't be working at the office till 3 o'clock in the morning," and I would swear that I was while sitting in front of a slot machine. And she would try to track me and never be able to. And I would swear that the location where my office was so poor in terms of the, Wi-Fi capabilities or whatever the hell I made up, that she couldn't track me. which was, one of hundreds of that I've told in order to continue to gamble.
Yeah, sure. It's just it's like the layers of guilt, isn't it? The layers of the lies and yeah.
And it almost becomes, it becomes routine.
Yeah.
It becomes easy. When we first, I'll speak for myself. When I first started lying, I did feel guilty about it, but that was very short-lived. And then it became, then I would lie about anything. Like my wife would say, like, "Oh, did you have a salad for lunch today?" And I said, "Oh yeah, definitely." But I'd have like a cheeseburger. I mean, even lies that were just insignificant, because my mind was such that my first response, if someone asked me a question, was not to respond truthfully, but to respond in a way that would benefit me the most.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Do you know what? I was recording a vlog this week actually, and one of the things that I was sort of speaking about it was the first time I lied, and it was I was in the bookies. Do you have bookies in the US? I don't know if you do.
Well, each state's different. I mean, we certain states have not really bookies, but certain states, let's say, have slot machines, what you would call fruit machines, in bars or convenience stores, etc. But no, we have mostly casinos on states that allow them. But I've since become extremely well versed in gambling in the UK, so I know what the bookies are. Our bookies are the guys that illegally take bets.
Okay.
So there's definitely a difference in the way that we interpret that term, but I know what you're saying.
Okay, and isn't there? I think, is it pokies as well down in Australia as well?
Pokies, Australia, fruit machines for you, and slot machines, or we call them sometimes. I don't know if you ever heard VLTs or video lottery terminals, and that's just a way for that states were able to have slot machines by making it part of their lottery,
right?
And not violate any kind of state constitutional prohibition on gambling machines. I mean, it's crazy, but there's obviously always a way to get around it. But you were saying about the bookies.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. So it was it was the first time I lied, and I almost got a bigger buzz out of the fact that I could hide what I'd been doing. I'd been in the bookies and I'd got in trouble with the police. I'm pretty ashamed of it. My friends will know this story. It's quite embarrassing. I appreciate if you didn't share, but yeah. And my dad called me up and he's like, "Alex, where are you?" And I was in the bookies, and I had to lie because the police were waiting at my home, and had to go back. And obviously, I was embarrassed because of the whole police incident, and what I was going to say to my dad, but then the fact that I had to hide where I'd been for the last couple of hours on a Sunday afternoon, and the fact that I could pass that off, that I'd been at the shops or wherever I'd been, quote unquote been, I got a bigger buzz out of that. And it was like, whoa, that was easy. That was a real, fine, I don't know what the word is, but so yeah, I can totally relate to that.
And I hear what you're saying, because I've felt the same way at times. It's almost like we're able to pull off the con, and that's how. And I've heard that from many people that have a gambling problem. That it's almost it allows us to take the risk of doing something and hiding it, and it doesn't necessarily have to be gambling or money related. And being able to get away with it, it's very interesting that a lot of us sometimes get that feeling of, wow, it worked.
Yeah, sure. So Jeff, I mean, are you okay for time? Are you okay for like another 10, 15 minutes?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great. I mean, I've got a list of questions here, and for the listeners' benefit, I've got sort of three lines down, and there's about 20 in total.
I told you, Alex, I talk too much.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to do a part 2 another time or something. But we could.
Story of my life. That's a story. Brian, are you listening? That's a story of my life. Part 2.
Oh my goodness. So, so tell us, how did you get involved with the Delaware Council and pick up a job there as a peer support specialist? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll start by saying that I got connected with it. As I said, my wife and my son reached out to them, so I knew of their existence. And I also knew that one of the people that regularly attended my GA meeting worked there.
Okay.
And, after being unemployed for a number of months, I happened to I was looking for something to do. And I said to him, is there any kind of opportunity? I mean, even volunteering, I would be happy to do that. So to make a long story short, there was an opportunity for me to have a couple of shifts on our helpline. And usually they want people with a year of recovery at least, but I was pretty close to it and got training for it. And that involved maybe just 3 or 4 days a month having a shift, answering calls for people with a gambling problem. And that sort of led me just to connect with some people at the council and the executive director, and had a meeting with them. And there was an opportunity that came up they wanted to hire me, to be frank with you, which was amazing. And there's always work to do, as you can imagine. So because of my background as a lawyer, they thought that I could bring some value in advocating for treatment of gambling addicted offenders in the criminal justice system by educating judges and lawyers about the addiction, and hopefully to try to see if people that commit crimes, and they're usually nonviolent economic crimes to further their gambling, could have the same opportunities to get treatment as people with, let's say, a substance addiction like drugs. We have over 3,000 drug courts in the US, and people that are eligible to enter a drug court, basically the idea behind them is you don't just punish them, you develop a treatment plan.
Yeah.
So the underlying disease or addiction that motivated the criminal behavior can be addressed. And then if they follow through with a plan, which usually could be as long as 18 months or longer, then for many, the charge is dismissed. And it's often more onerous than actually if you go to a traditional court and you're slapped on the wrist or serve a couple of months in prison, because here for violent, prison mostly are for violent crimes, although depending upon how much money is involved, it could very well warrant a prison term. So that's what I've been doing. In fact, that's really my role. That my title is Judicial Outreach and Development Director, and that was a title that I had to make up to sort of fit with what I do. Where the peer support comes in is that there was an opportunity for me to get certified as a peer recovery specialist. And in fact, I was the first one in my state with lived experience in gambling addiction. Everybody else has lived experience in drugs and alcohol. So that was kind of neat to do that. And I also got a certification in gambling counseling, but I'm not a counselor, nor do I think that I have the necessary credentials as people that have gone through years of school. But it allows me to, when I give a talk about gambling, I do that a lot, I go to conferences and share my story. And that's usually coupled with at least some education about the addiction, because it's important for people to know about it. So now I have at least some credibility that I have gone through some formal training and I'm just not talking, based on my own knowledge or my own learning.
Yeah.
So that's been great. So I love what I do, and
Yeah.
that caused me to go into a couple of areas on my own, which, as you know, one was the podcast. And I became involved in that as a fan, actually, of Brian on,
Yeah.
It's All in the Addicted Gamblers podcast. And back in 2017, I heard it, and I say this and people laugh because, I didn't even know what a podcast was much before that. Somebody had told me that at work that I should listen to this podcast called Serial, because it was, me being a lawyer, and it was about this really interesting crime and alleged, murder of somebody strangling their girlfriend. And I loved it. And that caused me to say, oh, I wonder if there's a gambling addiction podcast.
Okay.
Now, there are plenty, as you know, Alex, of gambling podcasts that teach you how to gamble. But at the time, at least as far as I could see, there was only one, which was All In. And I started to listen to Brian. At that time, he was doing episodes with his best friend, Chris, who was not a gambler. And Brian was just sharing his story. And I thought, man, this was fascinating to be able to actually listen to this. And it was entertaining, and I really liked it. And Brian had put out something or said on the podcast that anybody that's interested in sharing their story can come on. And so I emailed him, and that's sort of how it started. And then we became, friends, and at a point where I guess he had me on the podcast so much that he said, you know what, we might as well make you the co-host because, you've been on too much. Right. So I love doing that. I'm great. I'll always be grateful for him to introduce that to me, because for me, that's also a form of recovery.
Yeah, sure.
And that got me thinking about what else can we do that's sort of outside of the box in terms of reaching out to people, mostly young people, that are struggling with gambling, but maybe are not ready to go to a GA meeting, or maybe they have this perception of what that meeting was like, or maybe they've attended it and they didn't connect because there are mostly the people in a GA meeting look more like me than they do look like you, Alex. And the people that look like me usually are not in recovery just a few years. They haven't gambled in 25 years. So when they share about their gambling stories, they talk about gambling, I'm going to say with bookies, but American bookies, meaning the illegal bets, and not about the forms of gambling that are much more common today, especially with online gambling and poker and sports betting and things of that nature. So that's when I started to, acquaint myself with social media, which was definitely an interesting journey, because I was on Facebook, but old people are always on Facebook.
Yeah, I was going to say,
right?
It's just for the oldies, isn't it?
It's just for the old people. So then I started to, my son and son-in-law actually introduced me to Reddit a while back, because they would send me this really, stupid stuff that was posted on Reddit, because they know my maturity level was such that I would laugh at that stuff, and I liked reading it. Yeah. And then it caused me to see and discover that there was this problem gambling sub on Reddit. And Alex, I started reading it, and I knew, it was clear that most of the posts were from younger people who were really struggling, but many of them weren't doing anything or didn't know what to do. I know a lot of them were listening to Jamie's podcast, which is great.
Yeah.
After Gambling podcast, and I thought that was awesome. But I kept thinking about, what else are they doing? And so I said, you know what, I'm going to post something to see if anybody had an interest in an online group. And I sort of used what I learned by talking to people in my own GA room that were younger, that I would see come in and go out just as quickly, and say, well, tell me what, you can tell me I'm not, I don't have allegiance or any kind of
Yeah.
skin in the game. So tell me what you don't like about GA, or what maybe it could do to improve or make you want to go. So the couple of things that I heard mostly were this generational divide.
Mm-hmm.
And the second one was that the meetings were really long. And especially guys in their 20s and women in their 20s and 30s that were driving to a meeting. They spent a half an hour to get there. They spent 2 hours in a meeting. Many of the shares they weren't really connecting with. Then they'd leave the meeting and somebody that looked like me again would, stop them in the parking lot to talk more because, some people are retired and they don't have to get up early, or they don't have to get up and feed their kid or to go to work. And I understood it. It was a very huge commitment to go to a meeting. So I said, let's try it. The only parameters that I sort of wanted to put in place are that the meetings would be online and everyone that participated would be on camera as well as audio, because I wanted to create that connection so I can look at you and you can look at me. And while I'm sharing, you can see my pain.
Yeah.
If I was challenged or going through a difficult time, and when I was sharing and I achieved some sort of success, you could also see how I was looking at that point. And you could compare the two. And you can just develop that connection that we can't develop just on a phone call. Because I've tried the phone calls. And while they're better than not doing any meeting, you don't really develop those relationships. So posted that, started with a couple of people saying, yeah, I'll be into it. And the meetings are just 1 hour. So again, not to interfere with too much time. Start out with 3 meetings a week. And then actually 1 meeting a week, I should say. And then as a couple more people joined, what I was shocked about is that I just thought it was going to be Americans, to be honest with you. And then I got, contacted by people in the UK, and then people in Australia, and people, somebody in Turkey and somebody in Poland.
It's truly global, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it was crazy. And I said, man, and these people can speak English. And I'm saying, like, we are so, seriously, we are so, I don't know if it's snobbery or just self-indulgent here in the States that we don't think we really need to learn a second language.
As I say, most of you don't have a passport, do you?
Well, that's another story. Well, right now we don't need them. But seriously, I'm amazed at that. So this whole, like you said, global, element to it, and the international element to it has been really fun. So while it's support, we also get to meet people from different places, and the experiences, though, as you know, they're all the same. Maybe there were different forms of gambling. Maybe, the opportunities that were there for persons in other places were different, but we've all experienced the pain, and we all want to get better, and we all want a group that understands us because we've all been there, and that we can share. And it's just been incredibly amazing to me and helpful. And so now, then COVID came, and, not knowing obviously that this was going to happen, and GA meetings were shut down. And then there was this, boom with online meetings and Zoom and all that. So right now we run meetings every day, and we try to accommodate people that are in different time zones. So we stagger the times, and that's been great. So between the meetings and the podcast and work, and also, I reach out and do some peer work with some individuals, again, on my own. It's great. And then of course I have my family, and I have 3 grandchildren that I've, that have come into my life since recovery. So I can't tell you how amazing my life is, and what I owe to recovery. And that's one of the reasons why I do what I do, because, I do think that I can use this nightmarish experiences that I've had with gambling. As I'm sure you feel the same way, doing what you do, somehow to help others and to bring value. And it's great. And I get to meet such great people and develop friendships virtually. Yeah. But like, like you and I and others that have,
great.
I mean, some, the people that I go to meetings with, I mean, some of them that have been with me for a while, I mean, I would consider them close friends.
Sure.
So it's great. I just have to watch myself in terms of balancing my life.
We spoke about this the other week, didn't we? Where it's
right.
trying to balance it all together. Yeah. What did you mean? Families and relationships and
But again, my family knows what I do and how important it is, and they're very supportive. And I do look, when my daughter, who has my newest grandchild, it's her first, and he's 4 months old. She knows that anytime she needs me to babysit, I put everything else aside.
Yeah.
And I do that, and I have just both of my kids, Alex, live within a few miles from where I live. So
that's great.
It can't be any better than that. So I'm blessed about that. But yeah, it's pretty damn awesome. So I just hope somebody that is listening now or listens to your other episodes or our episodes, the thing that I would love people to walk away with is that there's always opportunity to recover. There's always hope, no matter how much of a rock bottom. And I really don't like that term, because you can always go lower as long as you're alive. But no matter how much of a bottom that you've hit and how much shame you have about your gambling and about, other things that we've all, or many of us, have destroyed in our addiction, there's always hope to turn our lives around. And you demonstrate that. I think I demonstrate that. All of us that are, in this community of reaching out and doing our part to help others, know how rewarding it is to do that. Because I feel for myself, I get as much, if not more, out of it myself than I give to others, which sounds really, really old-fashioned, corny bullshit, but it really isn't. I mean, I really genuinely feel that way.
Yeah. Me too. I mean,
I'm just shy. I'm sorry that I'm so shy that I haven't really talked much.
You're like the perfect guest.
I know you have the 17 questions, and I sure hope that I've answered all of them.
Oh my goodness. No, you spoke at such great length about so many really important topics. I mean, I just want to go on record and say how inspirational I think you are. You're very humble, you're modest, you've got a massive, you've got a big hart. And yeah, like I want to echo everything you've said, which is amazing to, I consider you a close friend. And to meet like-minded people on the Zoom groups, and like you mentioned a bit earlier about the GA thing, where you go and all of a sudden you're like, there are other people like me on this planet. Right. I totally. There's a few, not everybody, but a lot of people that I've spoken to, I'm like, we must be wired the same way. We must have some sort of DNA. It's like I don't know. It's almost like a family in a bizarre sort of way.
It really is. It really is.
Yeah, it's So Jeff, I mean, just before we wrap things up, is there anything that you want to mention? Where can people find you? Obviously, I'll leave links in the description, but is there anything that you want to sort of mention before we go?
Sure. People can always connect with me on Twitter. It's JPW DEL. It's D like in David, EL 1955, and I'll let you figure out what that means. That's my that's my Twitter handle, and reach out. I mean, if anybody's interested in getting help, looking into our Zoom group, or just talking. I just love to connect with people. I really do, and I love to be able to share. As they say, what I found. I want to share what I have been blessed to have found with others who need it, because look, that's how I got what I was found. Somebody helped me. Many people helped me, whether it was in GA or just family members, friends that have reached out. So I want to give back because I want to feel good, continue to feel good about myself. And that's what helps me the most. So, again, I appreciate that. I mean, I have to say again that seriously, I did reach out to you, as you know, because I love what you're doing. People sometimes say, is there competition? Because now there are a number of podcasts, and I don't think anybody feels that way. I mean, we all have the same mission. I'll be honest with you, Alex, and I've never said this before, but the only jealousy or envy that I have is, I wish I did this when I was 30. But I can't help that, and I've learned to accept the things that I can't change. So,
I mean,
so
I don't know.
It's amazing.
Yeah, no. It's I mean, it's just like the rich tapestry of life. You have such richness of a life and of experiences. And I just want to say, if anyone is listening and wants to reach out to Jeff, please do it. Just do it. He's an amazing man. Well, thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Alex. I enjoyed it. This was great to sort of be in this seat. Now I know how you want to all in. It's kind of interesting now. It's great.
It's good, and I must say, that's one of the questions I didn't ask, but because All In, Jeff and Brian, they recently did a live episode for the Connecticut Council.
Yeah. That was really cool. Yeah, we did that last week, and it was amazing. Again, grateful to the Connecticut Council on problem gambling for giving us that opportunity. We had a session of about 1 hour where obviously the conference was virtual given the current situation, but we did it, and I think we got a lot of positive feedback about it. And again, a lot of people, even that do the kind of work that we do and in our community of recovery or treatment or prevention of gambling addiction, some of them really, for the first time, realize that there are, other tools like a podcast to reach out. And I think that's really important. So it was fun. It was kind of nerve-wracking, actually, because as you know, we have that security of knowing that if we screw up, we could always edit something. But when we record it before a live audience, if you will, but we didn't manage to screw up, I don't think. Too bad.
No, that's good. And
it was fun.
And
we're going to play it on the podcast too. So.
Oh yeah, please do. Yeah.
So anybody could listen.
Yeah. And they can find you all in. Well, it's at A Podcast For You on Twitter.
Yes.
But it's All In, the Addicted Gamblers podcast, and you've got over 150 episodes, and it's great. Go and listen, guys. Go and listen.
Yeah, it's great. It's great fun.
Right, Jeff, I've realised I've been sat here in the dark. You've just been looking at some sort of silhouette of a man. I'm sat here and the room's like pitch black. I've just looked at myself on the screen.
See how long I've been talking?
Is he there?
Poor Alex. Alex is going to be snoring soon, and I'll still be talking.
Oh my goodness! I need some of those pills, those sleeping pills. Well, Jeff, thank you ever so much, and I'll see you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alex.
It takes a huge amount of courage to tell your story publicly, so I'd like to say a massive thank you to Jeff once again. From his story, I could really resonate with how different you feel to everyone else during a gambling addiction. You feel completely alone and isolated. But the amazing thing is, upon finding recovery, you realise there are thousands, if not millions, of people similar to yourself. Or as Jeff puts it, finally being able to find people from the same part of the planet. It's incredibly comforting. It's inspiring to hear that Jeff is free from gambling, 5+ years now. and how he is helping thousands of people from across the globe as a peer recovery specialist, and also his amazing gambling addiction recovery podcast that he hosts alongside Brian, all in the Addicted Gamblers podcast. They have interviewed some amazing guests, and I highly recommend tuning in. It's such a good podcast, I can't tell you. Not only this, but Jeff has become a great friend and source of inspiration. If any of you are in need of help and support, I highly recommend getting in touch with him. He is super amazing. You can find his details in the podcast description. So, we've reached the end of Series 3, and I'd like to say a massive thank you to all of our guests for appearing on the podcast and sharing their inspirational stories. Thank you to Lewis, Paul, Ben, Nick, Danny, Colin, and Jeff. I hope you've enjoyed listening to their stories as much as I have. I'd also like to say a massive thank you to you for tuning in. Thank you for your patience with my somewhat alternative interview technique. I'm getting better, I promise, or trying to anyway. Yes, I'd also like to say a massive thank you to the sponsors of the podcast, Talk Band Stop, for their continued support. We're going to hear from them in Series 4. The main aim with the Invisible Addiction is to help people who felt gambling problems, who identify with stories echoing their own experiences. If one of you has listened and gotten comfort from the podcast, that is amazing. That is my measure of quote unquote success. I'm delighted to announce that there will be a 4th series of podcasts. There's some amazing guests lined up, people from around the world sharing their stories and experiences. I am super excited to share them with you. In the meantime, please look out for some vlogs on YouTube that I'll be uploading, sharing parts from my gambling addiction story and other bits and pieces. Right now in the UK, there's a gambling app review going on, and yeah, it's a very busy time. So yeah, get involved. All right. Finally, I always forget to ask this, and I hate asking for favors. Like, it's a bit cringy, isn't it? But it would be amazing if you would leave a nice review of the podcast, especially on iTunes. It will really help boost the podcast in the mental health category. And yeah, in all seriousness, it will help reach more people that need it the most. I want to say a massive thank you for all your support. Take care, guys, and I'll speak to you soon. Ta-da.